Thanks for taking the time to listen to our latest content here on the Blood Red channel. Guy here with just a quick message. Do you want the very latest Liverpool FC news directly into your inbox? Well, then sign up to our daily LFC newsletter, which will bring you the breaking news and big events from around Anfield. To subscribe, just go to bit.ly/LFC newsletter. That's bit.ly/LFC newsletter, or click the link in the description of this podcast and pop in your email address. It really is that simple. That link once more, bit.ly/LFC newsletter. Well, thanks for your time, and on with the podcast. Hello and welcome to the latest Academy show here from us on the Blood Red channel, courtesy of the Liverpool Echo. I'm Guy Clarke. Alongside me, as always, our resident Academy expert, Matt Addison. Matt, we got a fair bit to get into, albeit, of course, Academy football's been scrapped due to the outbreak of the coronavirus and the impact it's had on football. But we're going to get into the season that the youngsters have had at Kirby, how the 18s, 23s have gone on as well as we're going to talk about, in terms of the transfer window, we don't know the landscape, how that could change, what youngsters could actually benefit from Liverpool maybe not being able to bring in too many players, as well as our regular one to watch before at the end we have a bit of fun and go through some end of season awards, what academy players that we think have stood out during the course of the last season. Well, Matt, thanks for joining me. How are you, mate?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, mate. As you say, it's a disappointing end to the academy season, but it's been another good one for the academy sides. Obviously, we've seen them, playing against Aston Villa and Shrewsbury as well. Lots of young players coming through, so it's still an exciting time, even though it's come to a premature end for obvious reasons. But I'm sure, like all of the academy players and staff and myself as well, we can't wait for football to come back, and that includes getting down to Kirby as well to watch some of the youngsters play. So, yeah, as I say, it's disappointing, but what can we do? It's the situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, well, we'll get into rounding up and sort of tying up any loose ends that obviously have come out because of the decision for academy football to finish. But we talk about the youngsters, and you said right at the top there that they've had those games against Aston Villa, Everton and Shrewsbury, all playing for the first team this year. We don't know, of course, when football does get back underway. In fact, whether or not, if Liverpool do secure the title quite early on, whether Jurgen Klopp and Mark, as we're going to get onto with maybe the transfer window being a changing landscape, might actually see opportunities for a number of them to show what they can do in a first-team environment.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that certainly two or three will have that opportunity. I think it all sort of hinges how much Jurgen Klopp goes down that path of giving the youngsters a chance on, how long it's going to be before football comes back, because there is the potential that there could only be maybe 2 or 3 weeks between this season finishing and the next one starting, in which case, the first team are not going to have a massive pre-season to get back up to scratch. So, Jurgen Klopp and his staff will have to keep those first team players who are going to start next season absolutely fit, ready to go. So it sort of depends on that. If the authorities view it as a chance for, this sort of period now to be the players' rest, and then there's not really too much of a gap between this season finishing and the next one starting, maybe that's not so good for the youngsters. But, even in that scenario, I think that there's still a good chance that, the likes of Neco Williams or Harvey Elliot will get minutes for sure, and one or two others as well, as I know we're going to come on to in just a few seconds.
Yeah, well, let's get into everything then. And before we actually talk about how the 18s and 23s did finish in their respective seasons, just the broad brushstroke of actually the position we find ourselves in. We've already clarified, of course, that the seasons have been finished, but we don't know beyond that actually what the outcomes are going to be, do we?
Not at the time of recording, no. It's a strange situation in that obviously youth football is important, and the players coming through, their futures and that sort of thing are essentially the future of the game, but it's not the priority at this moment in time. So what we know so far is that the EFL and the Premier League made a sort of joint statement to say that, youth football, and that includes sort of grassroots level as well. It includes, your regular under-8s, under-9s, all the way through to Premier League 2 and Liverpool's under-23s and that sort of thing. So all of those games are stopped. There's not going to be any more games this season. But as you say, in terms of, whether the season is just going to be null and void and forgotten, we don't know yet whether, there'll be some sort of way of maybe using a points per game system to award titles and things like that. Obviously, it sort of goes without saying that whatever happens at youth level is completely, not linked at all to what will happen at the top. So the fact that null and void is still on the table for youth football, that's not an indication whatsoever of what could happen for Jurgen Klopp and his senior team. But it's interesting because there's a lot of things which, have to fall into place for the rest of this season to be finished at senior level, and probably not too many of those things can be replicated at youth level. So we know, for example, that the finances, obviously at youth level, are nowhere near. The crowds, again, that's, playing behind closed doors is essentially what the youth teams do. Obviously, it's on television and things like that. But apart from myself and maybe Ian Doyle and some of the parents, there's not usually a great deal of people, down at the academy to watch these games. So again, that's not going to be a huge issue, but there are going to be knock effects in terms of, the elite player performance plan, things like that. Sort of ways that players and clubs are assessed in terms of, we have different categories at youth level. So if a club is trying to make it from category 2 up to category 1, things like that, they're obviously going to be delayed. But not just for the financial aspect, but obviously varying other factors as well. It's just not the priority at this stage. I think we're only going to find out what's going to happen with youth football once it's sorted out at the top, and hopefully, fingers crossed, after this Sunday, in fact, the day that this podcast is going to go out, we should find out a little bit more about the government's approach to sort of lockdown and what can happen from that point on. And I think only then will we know what happens at senior level, and only then will we know what happens at youth level too.
Yeah, of course, we do know, obviously, already what has happened at youth level so far this season before, of course, the seasons were cancelled. And I suppose we best start with the age group we often do with here on the Academy Show, the under-18. So I remember a couple of episodes back on the Academy Show, we were talking about, obviously, that what looked like it could be a title showdown with Manchester City didn't go the way of the Young Reds. And I suppose for them, the season was not, I wouldn't say petering out, it's probably too harsh a phrase to say, because a number of lads had made the step up, of course, to the under-23s, but they were now behind, obviously, in that title race with Man City.
Yeah, they were just about still in contention. I think it was 12 points behind that they were behind Manchester City after that 4-2 defeat that you speak about. But I think they did still have 2 games in hand. So it was still on. There was still time for them to draw that sort of that gap between the two sides back. And it would have been interesting to see, just how far they could have pushed on. I mean, I know we've spoken in the past, obviously, we're going to talk about Neil Critchley and the under-23s and stuff like that. And obviously he's now departed for Blackpool. I think part of the reason that maybe a decision wasn't taken on the sort of replacement for him at that stage was the fact that the title race was still ongoing, and maybe it wouldn't be the best time for the under-18s and Barry Lutus, who's certainly one of the top candidates for that job, to be moving on. So certainly Liverpool hadn't given up hope, but it's a common phrase on this podcast, and it's a phrase which anybody who's ever spoken to Barry Lutus will know, is that it's all about development. Obviously they would prefer to be top of that table. They'd prefer all of the players and all of the staff to be first rather than second behind Manchester City, but after the season they had last season, which ended up with the FA Youth Cup and that sort of thing, okay, there probably wasn't going to be any trophies this season, but with 5 matches to play, I think still they would have wanted to finish this season. They would have wanted to get over the line and finish it properly. So it's disappointing, I think, for all of those young players. It's disappointing that they can't train and they can't continue their development, because it is going to have a bit of an impact, this not playing, but there's nothing we can do about it. And of course, it's an impact not just for Liverpool, but for every team up and down the country too.
And when you think about it as well, obviously what goes on at Kirby, aside from even the football side of things, the first team were due to relocate there during the off season. I just wonder, as well as obviously talking about the 23s, you mentioned there that Neil Critchley has obviously still not been formally replaced in its position as the head coach of the under-23s. And obviously you've still got all of the training ground issues going on as well. But I'd imagine with everything being pushed back, we're not hearing anything that obviously the move to Kirby isn't going to happen. And of course, Liverpool do still have Melwood anyway.
Yeah, I think obviously it's going to be delayed. It's going to be pushed back, but it all comes back to, in terms of finishing the training facility and moving the first team over, it all comes back to when key workers are sort of not the only ones who are allowed to be at work and that sort of thing. So as soon as they can get the builders back in and continue to do that work, I think that's, it's not going to be an issue. I think the fact that the season has been delayed, pre-season is probably going to be delayed as well now. If those two delays sort of align and work alongside each other, it might just be a case of, that they are still in there for pre-season, but it's, pre-season is just later in the year. So it's not going to be a huge difference, but, it is frustrating for everyone involved. And I'm sure with the building work having gone on for as long as it's gone on for, I think a lot of people, I know speaking to people who work at the academy and that sort of thing, they were all really looking forward to this, being concluded. And look, if it's pushed back a couple of months, then unfortunately, so be it.
Well, I suppose, as we say, that the under-23s don't still have a permanent manager in place with Neil Critchley going to Blackpool. But we did say at the top that obviously if Liverpool made no signings, it could open up the door for a number of those under-23 players to perhaps step up and show what they can do. Who are the sort of the main contenders we're looking at in terms of that then, Matt?
Yeah, I think obviously it's going to have a huge impact on the football club in terms of, being able to sign players or not. And obviously then that has that trickle-down effect. So, yeah, there's a few players who I would pick out in terms of benefiting and probably not the sort of names that you might expect, to be honest. I think I've seen a few people having discussions, say, about Curtis Jones, Harvey Elliot, Neco Williams. I think those are sort of obvious names that you think might get more first-team minutes. But then, I would argue that probably Curtis Jones and Neco Williams in particular, they probably would have got those minutes regardless of transfers, because I don't think Liverpool would have gone out this summer, for example, and bought a backup right back for Trent Alexander-Arnold. I think the plan was always for Neco to come in and do that. So the fact that Adam Lallana and Nathaniel Klein are almost certainly going to be moving on this summer, despite the coronavirus outbreak, I think it's not going to make a huge difference for those players, because, the plan all along, I think, has been Adam Lallana will move on, Curtis Jones will take his place and will sort of take on the minutes that he had. So I don't think it's going to make a huge difference for them. But then, as we say, that knock-on effect and the trickle-down sort of thing, will come to a few different players who maybe it will impact in terms of them moving up from the 18s to the 23s and sort of fast track them a little bit more. But in terms of left back, I think obviously Adam Lewis potentially could come in. I think he's one who, for me, he's still ahead of Yasser Larouci at the moment. I think it's an area that Liverpool possibly could have gone into the market for in terms of buying someone. Maybe obviously James Milner is still there. He signed his new contract in December, so he's still there. He can still play there. But I think, yeah, the big winner for me, I think, is probably Adam Lewis. I think it gives him an opportunity to come and be Andy Robertson's backup at left back. Having said that, maybe Liverpool will do some business this summer. So, we don't know for sure yet. But if I had to say right now who was, going to benefit the most there, probably Adam Lewis would be the one, because for me, he is further down the line than Yasser Larouci at this moment in time.
Interesting stuff, of course, because he's a guy who's been away on pre-season with Jurgen Klopp's side, first team side in the past as well, as have a few names that are out on loan. And you just wonder, I suppose, the long-term view that Liverpool have taken to developing talent, sending them out to whether it be lower EFL leagues like Oxford United, Ben Woodburn there, of course, Rhian Brewster's in the Championship, but Harry Wilson in the Premier League. This now might have worked as a nice little testing and breeding ground for these players, should they be needed to come back and obviously supplement that first team.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating summer. I think it always was for the likes of Rhian, Brewster, Harry Wilson. I think it was, it's that time now where a decision has to be made one way or the other, whether they've got a long-term future at Liverpool, whether they want a long-term future at Liverpool as well. Obviously, Ben Woodburn, I think, is slightly different, and he's obviously slightly younger than Harry Wilson. He's spent a large portion of this season obviously out injured, as we've discussed in the past. So certainly for him, I think there's still, there's still 1 or 2 years before it reaches that make or break point. But certainly for Wilson, probably for Rhian Brewster as well, I think it's that time now where, they've played, well, both of them have played championship football. Harry Wilson has played, obviously, top flight football. I think, obviously, with the impact of the coronavirus, maybe there won't be quite so many clubs queuing up to sign him, but certainly, I'm sure he's made a very good impression at Bournemouth. I think if they've got the finances to make a deal happen, I think they'd love to keep him, because I think he might still be their top Premier League goal scorer this season. I think he scored 7 in 23, which is a decent record for somebody who plays in his position. I think he's sort of proven now that he's definitely at the level where he could play for a mid-table Premier League club and get in that starting 11 week in, week out. So for him, the decision is, does he want to be possibly a Xherdan Shaqiri replacement or something like that in terms of coming in and being a squad player at Liverpool, or does he want to play week in, week out? I don't know what he's thinking, but quite possibly, for me, if I was him, I think I'd want at least one season at Liverpool where I'm a proper part of that first team squad, just to see what happens and see where we go from there, really. But yeah, Rhian Brewster possibly could go out on loan in the Premier League next season. But again, it's a big decision for him, because he's at an age where he will want to play week in, week out, and he's not going to get that at Liverpool. So maybe it's one where he gets sold and Liverpool maybe have a buyback or some sort of percentage sell-on clause in his deal. So yeah, it's going to be interesting times for all three of them. I think certainly Ben Woodburn could go out on loan again. Rhian Brewster could go out on loan maybe to a Premier League rather than a Championship club next season. And for Harry Wilson, it's sort of either you sell him or keep him and make sure that he's getting minutes at Liverpool. I think the time for loan deals is certainly over for him.
Yeah, he's obviously 23 now as well. So having just turned that in March. So as you say, he probably is getting towards that crossroad period. But he's a player that's been so much excitement around for a few years at Liverpool. It would, as you say, be nice to actually see him get given a chance to be part of that first team picture. But okay, then we discussed the players who have been out on loan. We've discussed a few of the guys in the under-23s who might look to step up. But I suppose if they step up, the under-23 lads, that means there's a void for some of the players in the under-18s to then themselves maybe take that next step into the 23s.
Yeah, this is the sort of area where I think we'll see a big difference in terms of, we speak about if Liverpool don't sign anybody, what happens then? I think this is the area where we're really going to see a big difference. I think the likes of Jake Kane, Tom Hill, players like would have been fast-tracked maybe in the second half of next season. But, I would imagine, to be honest, that's going to happen a little bit earlier now, because if Curtis Jones, for example, is going to be needed more frequently for the first team than maybe what was expected initially, that will then mean that he's not going to be playing very much at all for the under-23s. So from that point, you then think, well, okay, if he's not going to play for the 23s, who is? And someone like Tom Hill, I think, will be right up there in terms of, that being a possibility. Jake Kane as well, obviously, another one who played at Anfield against Shrewsbury. Leighton Clarkson we're going to touch on in more detail, so I won't go too much into him just yet. But there's a lot of players who I think there's a big opportunity this summer for them to really grasp that because of what's happened. And obviously we know that football coming to a halt as it has, it can never be described as a good thing. But I think for some of these players, Jack Bairn as well, people like that, there's going to be places up for grabs this summer that maybe they would have been thinking might have been off the table. They're now back on the table. So it's a big opportunity. And I'd like to just touch on Abdi Sharif as well, because for him, he's had pretty much the entire season out injured. Again, unfortunate circumstances across the world, but the fact that this season has been cut short, almost it cut short the pain for him in that he was missing this time anyway because he was out injured. He wasn't developing because he couldn't play and he couldn't train. So the fact that the rest of his teammates are almost in the same position has almost done him a favour, to be honest.
Yeah, no, definitely. As you say, hopefully it's a bit of a reset for Abdi Sharif and he can obviously get back to playing football regularly. So you teased us in there, Matt, talking about a certain player who I think I'd said before about Harry Wilson. There'd been high hopes within the academy for him for a few years. It seems as though Leighton Clarkson may well be that new sort of golden boy within the academy that is sort of the pin-up boy for, I suppose, what they're hoping to develop at Kirby, obviously, as a conveyor belt of talent.
Yeah, I maybe wouldn't go quite as far as saying the golden boy, because I think the sort of 7 or 8 of these players who are at a similar level, and any one of them, or hopefully 2 or 3 of them, could potentially come in and make a real difference. But certainly Leighton Clarkson, given his age, I think he's still only 18. I think he turned 18 sort of at the start of this season. So the fact that he's developed as well as he has, I think is a testament to the work that the academy do and the work that he's put in as well. So it's certainly a player to watch. It's certainly a player that we've spoken about time and time again on this show and on plenty of others as well, with him making his senior debut this season. Of course, we spoke about how much of a valuable experience the likes of Aston Villa and Shrewsbury were for these players this season. I know Jurgen Klopp at the time got a fair bit of stick for doing what he did and making that decision to field these youngsters. But Leighton Clarkson is one who really probably most Liverpool fans would have heard of, but didn't really know too much about before those games. And certainly he came into his own and played really well. Didn't look out of his depth at all. And a piece that was on our website this week from Paul Gorst and Sam Carroll, I think that came out on Thursday. They sort of described him maybe as being the new Fabinho, which is really interesting. I think it's a little bit more like Jordan Henderson in terms of the way that he plays. I know that's a comparison I've made in the past. He's essentially a number 6. He's not really a perfect replica of either of the players, but for me, he's more of a silky passer of the ball more than a tough tackler, which I think sort of would push me more towards the Henderson comparison than anything else. But certainly he's a fantastic tackler. He is very slight. He's not a big player, as people will have seen at Anfield. He was maybe one of those players who, certainly I was going into the ground on that night, I was slightly concerned that physically he might not be able to cope with it being a lower league team. But he didn't seem too bad at all at doing that. And the sort of way that he plays, as that article from Paul and from Sam talked through, his characteristics, his sort of deep-lying playmaking role, sort of, those lofted passes, the fact that he can dictate the tempo even from such a young age, I think it certainly bodes well, because you can certainly imagine a Harvey Elliot or a Mo Salah or Sadio Mane running onto these balls that he plays over the top. And certainly, I think Jurgen Klopp and Pep Lijnders are big fans of him, and I can really, really understand why.
In terms of, you say there about like the Jordan Henderson Fabinho comparison, and of course, without wanting to overhype a young player within the academy, because obviously he's got a lot of work to do to get to the level of being anywhere near either of those kind of players. But given a player like Harvey Elliot comes in at the tender age that he arrives at the club at 16, just turned 17, and you've got Leighton Clarkson, who himself is 18, been playing in the under-18s and perhaps might make that move to the 23s a bit more permanent from next season, whenever that may be for the academy. Is there a right have a buzz of excitement actually around the lad that Liverpool very much from the early stages of his development have nurtured through to the player he is now and the player he could become?
Yeah, I think from the age of sort of 13, 14, 15, Liverpool knew that this was a player that really could go all the way. And I think certainly from next season, I'd be very surprised if we see him anywhere near the under-18s. I think he'll be straight in with the under-23s. Whatever happens with the managerial situation and coaching staff and that sort of thing, I think there's absolutely no reason for him to go back to the under-18s now. I think he's certainly progressed beyond that. And I think it's going to be interesting just to see what happens in terms of him going out on loan and how much he develops. I think he would have to develop physically and become a little bit stronger before he, say, goes out to the Championship and stuff like that, because I think that's the real test, really. We've seen the talent and the ability that he has. Obviously, as you say, we don't want to hype players up too much, but there is a real player there. There's a reason that he plays for Liverpool, and there's a reason that he's playing for the under-23s at the age of 17, 18, as he has this season. So just in terms of a comparison to another player, to be honest, I think Billy Gilmour at Chelsea, if people have seen a bit of him, I think there is a comparison, certainly in terms of the sort of age, stature, and the way that they sort of play and try and dictate the tempo. And I think, I'm going to certainly have my eye on Billy Gilmour to see what happens with him, whether Chelsea keep him, whether maybe he goes out on loan and that sort of thing, because I can sort of see Leighton Clarkson maybe following a similar sort of path. Obviously, it's a little bit more difficult to get into Liverpool's team than Chelsea's at this moment in time, but certainly it could be a potential pathway for him to follow.
Very interesting, because there's obviously those comparisons between Liverpool and Chelsea in the right-back position in the first team now with Reece James and Alexander-Arnold. Would be brilliant to see that sort of continue with two young midfielders with Gilmour and Clarkson. Well, anyway, we'll move on from that and sort of wrap things up over the course of the next 10 minutes or so with a nice little bit of end-of-season awards. We've got 4 of them that we're going to be going through. So Academy Player of the Season, we're going to do the under-23s and the under-18s. We've got also the best loan spell. Of course, we've spent a good bit of this podcast talking about players on loan from Kirby. And also, finally, to wrap things off, we're going to call it the Breakout Talent Award. You might sort of know it as most improved, but the player who probably came through the woodwork a lot quicker than maybe expected through the course of the last 9 months or so, and just talk through all of these categories. So we'll start off with the top award in the Academy, the Academy Player of the Season, Matt, for the under-23s.
Yeah, it was a sort of difficult one in the sense that there's obviously been a few players who've made that step up, but at the same time, it was a fairly easy choice in that it's sort of the obvious one, I think, in Curtis Jones. I think he's the one that everyone quite rightly is excited about. Obviously, Neco Williams is there or thereabouts as well, but I think we're going to touch on him in just a second for a different one of these awards. So, yeah, I think it was between those two, and I think Curtis Jones certainly is a player that deserves recognition for what he's done. I know we've spoken about it in the past, but he was one who he was sort of set a challenge at the start of the season to really progress this season in terms of his leadership and his responsibility and that kind of side of things, because he was an excellent footballer, but maybe needed to learn to almost be a little bit less selfish at times. And certainly he's done that. Obviously added goals to his game as well. He started to score goals from midfield. I think he scored a hat-trick in the space of about 20, 25 minutes at one stage. So he's got huge amounts of talent. I think he's now ready, as we say, to come in and place Adam Lallana at first team level. And look, that's the ultimate aim of the Academy, is to move players up into the first team, isn't it? So I think he's, alongside Neco Williams, almost guaranteed next season to play more minutes for the first team than what he has done this season. I think he's going to be, very occasionally used in the under-23s, because I think more often than not, he'll be there or thereabouts with the first team. So given that that's so important and that's the sort of entire aim of what the Academy does, I think it makes sense for such an exciting talent to be the sort of the top award winner, if you like. So yeah, Curtis Jones is my under-23s player of the season.
Yeah, as you say, being captain of that side, but also he of course scored the goal against Everton. I think if he'd been given the award for that alone, no one probably would have argued. But you mentioned that goals and adding goals to his game, but it's that hat-trick for me as well against Sunderland. I think it was at the back end of February, wasn't it, where he just put 3 goals on them towards the end of the game, and he just showed that killer ruthless streak that we can all see watching him playing in the under-23s what a brilliant talent he is, but he doesn't get complacent about it, does he?
No, he's got that balance between the sort of arrogance and turning up with a smile on his face and giving a wink to the camera on his way through the tunnel and that sort of thing. But at the same time, he's a winner and he wants to score as many goals and make sure that his team, like that Sunderland game is the perfect example, because I think Liverpool were already 2 or 3 goals up. There wasn't that long to go, but I think from memory he came off the bench and just sort of went, well, I'm on the pitch now, I might as well just score a hat-trick. And that's exactly what he did. So, look, it's that perfect blend, really, of talent and determination. And look, Liverpool are not stupid. They know that all of these players coming through have got talent. That's why they play for Liverpool and they represent Liverpool at those youth levels. But there's obviously something else that separates those who are really good footballers from those who go on to play for Liverpool's first team. We've seen with Trent Alexander-Arnold and various players that they've obviously got huge amounts of talent, but they've got huge amounts of sort of almost the mental side of the game as well, because it takes a great deal of mental strength to play for a team with as much pressure as Liverpool, with so many fans and so many people watching around the world. So for someone of that age to be able to come in and with such ease just make himself part of the furniture with the first team, you see with the Zoom calls that are going on and that sort of thing, he's very much a part of that team, and he doesn't shy away from that. He sort of embraces it, and we've seen him having a joke about the state of his hair and stuff like that with Jurgen Klopp. It feels very much now like he's one of those first team players, and he's not an under-23s player anymore. He's very much surpassed that.
Yeah, certainly has. Well, let's then have a word on who is going to take the gong for the under-18s.
Yeah, again, a difficult one. Difficult in many ways, really. Obviously, a lot of very good players have sort of come through the under-18s and moved into the under-23s. So I tried to pick a player really that had impressed, but had spent the vast majority of the time with the under-18s. So there's been a great deal of turnover really throughout the season. So yeah, the player that I've gone for in the end is Tom Hill, a midfielder that we've spoken about a few times, and he's one who did play actually against Aston Villa. I think to be honest, I think he struggled a little bit. I don't think he was absolutely on his game on that day, and he sort of did look a little bit out of his depth, but that was not a fair reflection of the player that he is, and that certainly wasn't the player that I've seen so many times for Barry Lutz's team. I think he's been pretty much every time I've watched the under-18s, certainly in the top 2 or 3 performers every single time. He's scored 8 times and assisted once in the league from midfield, which is a pretty impressive sort of spell. I think that's only in sort of 12 or 13 games he's done that from midfield, which is a real excellent sort of return for a player in that position. So yeah, he's a player who's got a huge future ahead of him, and as we mentioned before, there's going to be a lot of players who step up from the 18s to the 23s next season. I think 100% he is going to be those who more often than not will play for the 23s, because he's got the talent, he's ready. Obviously there's loads of midfielders at that level, but the fact that he can score goals and make that step up, he's a different type of player to Curtis Jones. But maybe if Curtis Jones isn't going to be there, maybe you're looking for somebody to come in and score those goals. And I think Tom Hill certainly could be one of those players.
That sounds very promising indeed. Well, of course, not all of the players who are developing under the name of Liverpool FC are doing it for either the 18s or 23s. So we're going to talk about the player who perhaps had the most productive and best loan spell away from Liverpool. Of course, it's some fairly big names. We touched on a few of them earlier on in the podcast. But who, whilst away from Kirby, has caught your eye this season, Matt?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because I think there's obviously been sort of varying degrees of success at various loans. Obviously, we've seen Rhys Williams has gone out and by all means has done quite well at Kidderminster. We've seen Isaac Christie-Davies went out, I think, to Belgium, and within 2 or 3 days broken his leg or whatever the injury was, and had to to cut that short. So sort of both ends of the spectrum there. I think for all of them, it will have been a benefit. I think obviously Herbie Kane as well has been out and has done quite well. But for me, we spoke about him before, Harry Wilson is the one really. I think he's obviously proven himself now at every level he's come through. He proved himself for Derby and for Hull in the Championship. Obviously, everyone knew how good he was when he played for Liverpool's academy. But now he's gone out and he's done it in the Premier League. So if, for me, I mean, first of all, for me last season, I'd have been tempted to keep him at Liverpool and use him as a squad player. The fact that he's now gone out and done that in the Premier League, I think only really can underline that even more. I think, as we said, it's make or break time for him. If he really is going to make it as a Liverpool player, it's got to be this summer, because he's 23 now. He's at an age where he's got that taste for regular Premier League football. He's one of Bournemouth's most important players. He's scored important goals. He's in their team pretty much every week. And if he doesn't start, he's one of the first ones off the bench. So I think for him, he's not going to want to relinquish that. I think he's got a taste for it now. He's going to want to go and play somewhere. And for me, if he doesn't stay at Liverpool, he can certainly do better than Bournemouth. I think he can, play for a team certainly in the top half. If not, a Leicester or a Wolves or a team that potentially could even be playing Champions League football next season. I really, I've always rated him very highly, and I think the fact that he scores goals from a wide position is something that obviously every team needs. We've seen that with Liverpool, with Salah and Mane. The big thing for them is that it's not just, well, in fact, it's not the centre forward who scores the goals. It is those wide players at Liverpool's first team level. So if Harry Wilson can continue to do that, and certainly there's a good chance, given what he's done on loan this season. I think he's obviously got a big future ahead of him. And either Liverpool will have a very good squad player, or they will make a significant amount of money off him. So in terms of productivity in a loan spell, I think you can't really look past Harry Wilson in terms of the best of the bunch this season. So it certainly provides Liverpool with a problem this summer, but probably a nice problem to have.
Yeah, he's shown, as you say, versatility, flexibility, adaptability, whether it be playing for a side battling relegation, a side at the top end of the Championship, or even in a mid-table side, perhaps looking to try and make a late surge for a playoff place or whatever under, as he did sort of for Hull City. He certainly has shown that he's been able to step up whatever has been asked of him. Well, finally then, before we do leave you on this edition of the Academy Show, the Breakout Talent Award. So the player for you, Matt, who, whether it be in the 18s, the 23s, or even out on loan, who is taken you pleasantly by surprise this season and just shown exactly how good they could be. And you said a problem in terms of Harry Wilson, a problem that Liverpool would have welcomed, this being a surprise for Liverpool, but certainly another that would be welcomed.
Yeah, not a complete shock. And I mentioned, obviously, before that Curtis Jones and Neco Williams were the two sort of standouts from the under-23s. I went with Curtis before, and I'm going to go with Neco Williams on this occasion, because I think, he's had a lot of injury problems. He was a player that maybe sort of 3 years ago was one who, people were getting very excited about. Trent Alexander-Arnold then comes through, and you think, well, you're not going to get two, real right backs coming through and sort of in the same position. It sort of seemed to be unlikely. Then, as I say, the injuries sort of got in the way for a little bit of time. So if you'd have said to me last summer that he would have made as much progress as what he has this season, it would have been a bit of a surprise. And the fact that it would now be a surprise if he wasn't full-time in the first team next season sort of shows exactly how far he's come. So not a breakout talent in the sense that, no one knew how good he was, because certainly 100% if you speak to any of the coaches or the people at the academy, they knew just how good he was, and certainly Wales know just how good he is, because they're absolutely desperate for him to make that step up. So not a surprise in terms of how good he is, but a surprise in terms of how many minutes he's got this season. And I think that Shrewsbury game was the highlight of the academy season in all, really. And he was one of those who really stood out. And on that occasion, he was bombing up and down that wing, and he just looked like Trent Alexander-Arnold, really, which is the biggest compliment that you can pay anybody in terms of a right back coming through the system. And obviously you don't want to put undue pressure on him. He's not the next Trent or anything like that. He's not a player who's going to come in and do what Trent Alexander-Arnold has done, but he's a very good player in his own right, and I think Liverpool fans are going to see a lot more of him next season.
Yeah, and if that relationship with Harvey Elliot, as you say, even in that Shrewsbury game, is anything to go by, there could be something special to look forward to for Liverpool in years to come. Well, Matt, that wraps us up on this edition of the Academy Show. We've got through an awful lot there, the seasons for both the 23s and 18s, the players who could save Liverpool some money or be squad players for them during what are uncertain times in the transfer market. Leighton Clarkson are one to watch, and of course they're wrapping things off with our Academy End of Season Awards. Well, that's it from us here on this edition of the Academy Show. Do make sure to comment in the comments section on YouTube. Any Academy prospects that you want to know a bit more about, let us know the names there. And of course, next time we're with you, we will do exactly that. For those who listen to us on the podcast platforms, wherever you get your audio on demand, if you can leave us a rating and review, as always, that is more than appreciated. Until next time, though, it's bye for now.